Well, we might as well get started. We're a little after 9, so welcome. And we do this every year, and PARCA has collaborated with Randolph Horn, who's a professor of political science here at Stanford University, who conducts our poll, helps design and direct the polling operation. And we are happy to present our 2016 results of the PARCA annual survey, and we'll let Randolph take it away.
Great. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm so excited every year to have the opportunity to participate in the PARCA poll. It's unlike, I think, any other poll we see in the state, and it's rare among those in the nation, in that we really can go in depth in some issues in ways that usually commercial pollsters are not able to do. This is the 10th year we've conducted a statewide survey, and it's the 3rd year that we've had a partnership with the Alabama Association of School Boards on a series of education questions that will appear in the second half of the presentation. The instrument includes, or the questionnaire includes, a variety of questions, some of which are legacy questions from earlier versions of the survey or earlier years of the survey. It'll give us some perspective on things historically. And then there's some new questions, and so the PARCA staff and I and our field director, Sarah Nolan, all contributed to the design of the instrument. Our methodology for the survey is a scientific survey, and so we use a statewide random digit dialing approach that includes both landline and cell phone numbers to produce the most representative sample we can of the state population. This year we completed 466 interviews, and that results in a margin of error of plus or minus 4.5%. The survey was in the field from January 4th to January 21st, and there's some weighting by race and gender to match the population figures in the state. So important for Alabama and relevant to the PARCA meeting next week and PARCA's ongoing work in promoting good government in the state of Alabama are a number of issues that are related to the state budget. And for a number of years, we've asked questions concerning what people think the most important area of investment is for state government. So we asked respondents this question. First, as a preface, I'm going to name 4 big investments the state makes with your tax dollars. If you had to choose just one of them as the most important service the state provides, which one of these would it be? And then after that, after they give their response to that, there's a follow-up. Which one of these services would you rank as the next most important? And then we continue until all 4 of these areas are ranked: education, healthcare for the poor and the elderly, public safety, including prisons and law enforcement, and highways. So the mean ranks are presented, but I think it's useful to look at the percentage ranking each area as the #1 priority. And as has been the case each time we've asked the question, education comes out with the highest ranking. And so nearly a majority, 48%, and a clear plurality, rank education as #1, followed by healthcare. And then there's considerable drop-off to for public safety and highways. People with higher levels of education, well, let me make one more general comment about the survey, and that is that one of the things we've observed over the years is that there tends to be relatively little polarization in the state population. That is to say, we generally find the public agreed on issues or questions of public policy, and in that way the public seems to be different than some of elites in politics or political leaders, where they are trying to distinguish themselves from each other, one party from the other, for example. and we see a lot of unity in the public. So I will point out, I've tested all these questions against a bunch of demographic, social, and geographic groups, and I'll point out when there are significant variations by any of those groups in the questions. But generally speaking, mostly we see unity on these questions. So on this public education ranking of number one, it's true that almost every group ranks public education as the number one priority. Those with higher levels of education tend to be even more supportive, and so they're more likely to rank it at number one than others. Now, those with a high school diploma or less are more likely to rate healthcare number one, and so there's a little bit of a difference there. And so those with the least education see education as less important than healthcare. We asked a new question this year. We wanted to know if people thought that these major budget areas were adequately funded. And so we randomized the order and said, asked the response, do you believe that this item is adequately funded in Alabama? And then went on to say the others. And so what you see is that in large part, the state population sees or believes that these major areas of state investment are underfunded. And so we have large majorities in most cases saying that education, healthcare, and highways are underfunded, and a slight majority saying that public safety is not adequately funded. And it's really only one group that I could identify, those with less than a high school diploma, had a majority saying that education was adequately funded. So really almost everybody else sees all of these areas as, or majorities of every other group see these areas as being underfunded. Now, a question we've asked over time is whether people would be willing to pay more in taxes to avoid cuts in each of these areas. And we asked a similar kind of question this year, and I've combined the results of the two questions here. So the first question is, would you be willing to pay more in state taxes to prevent budget cuts in each item? And the second question was, would you be willing to pay more in state taxes to maintain or achieve adequate funding in this area? And we see the results for these two question forms are virtually identical. So majorities of every group say that yes, they'd be willing to pay more in taxes to either avoid cuts or maintain or achieve adequate funding for education, and the same is true for healthcare. There was a little bit of polarization by gender on the public safety question. That is that a majority of women were willing to pay more in state taxes in order to either avoid cuts or maintain or achieve adequate funding for public safety, whereas men dipped slightly the other way. So there wasn't a huge difference, but there was an example of polarization there. A majority of one group opposing a majority of the other. Now we've asked this question, are you willing to pay more in taxes to avoid cuts, a number of times over the years. And this slide presents the results from 4 years that we've asked this question. And I think it's evident that there's a remarkable consistency across the years, that about 60%, maybe a little under, maybe slightly above, say that they would be willing to pay more in state taxes to avoid cuts in education. Healthcare is in the upper 50s consistently. Highways are consistently around or just below 40%. And the only one we see change in really is public safety. And so in the last couple of years, there's been a growing or larger percentage saying they are willing to pay more in taxes to avoid cuts in public safety. And this may be attributable to the publicity that the prison task force has received or other kinds of safety concerns that might be present in the state. But for the most part, we see consistency in all of these areas, and majority public, I guess you could characterize as majority public support for state efforts in education and healthcare. This year we asked a question which read, some people think the state has made so many budget cuts that additional revenue is needed to fund government services, while others think the state should make do with existing revenue. How about you? Do you think the state needs additional revenue, or that no additional revenue is needed to fund state services? So majorities or pluralities of every group say revenue is needed, and a majority of the entire population, or the entire survey says that more revenue is needed. And there was only one exception, that is those who identify themselves as strong Republicans, and they had a plurality saying that no additional revenue was needed. And so all the other possible ways that we could slice and dice the sample had either a majority or a plurality saying that additional revenue is needed. We wanted to ask what the public mood was concerning a number of potential ways to raise revenue, and they're arrayed on this slide in order of popularity. We asked this question. I'm going to list some ideas that have been suggested as ways to raise revenue for state government. Some proposals may raise more revenue than others. For each, tell me if you support or oppose the proposal. And the order of the proposals was randomized. And then we said, would you say you strongly support or oppose it, or just somewhat or oppose it? And so we had a variety of proposals, and the exact wording is listed in the top lines, and so the captions here just are give you an idea of what the question wording was for each item. These results were sort of surprising to me. I don't know what I expected. Perhaps I expected residents to oppose any revenue proposal. We do see that for a variety of proposals, such as matching the regional property tax rate, or matching the regional income tax rate, or removing the federal tax deduction from state income taxes, or increasing the sales tax rate, we had a majority opposing those. And for two proposals, increasing the gas tax and collecting sales tax on internet sales, we have pluralities opposing. But one item, making income tax rates progressive, and the wording there was making income tax rates more progressive so higher income residents pay higher rates, enjoyed majority support. And it enjoyed majorities of all subgroups, except those who self-identify as strong Republicans. And in that group, a plurality supported the proposal. So more strong Republicans supported than opposed this proposal. We asked respondents how they thought their taxes compared to people in other states with this question. Thinking about how much you pay in state and local taxes here in Alabama, do you think people like you in neighboring states pay more, less, or about the same in state and local taxes? And the plurality response was the same. slightly, I guess, slightly more. Democrats were slightly more likely to say that they thought people in other states paid more in taxes than they did, and I believe this was the subject of a PARCA quarterly last fall that compared Alabama's state and local tax effective state and local tax rates to tax rates of people in other states. And if I recall correctly, the conclusion of that publication was that Alabamians pay the lowest state and local taxes of people of any state. Is that correct?
Well, the tax revenues are the lowest.
Lowest per capita.
Per capita.
Okay.
So.
Okay. We asked another question considering how much people at different income levels pay, and I think, was this covered in the same PARCA quarterly, or was that a different PARCA quarterly that addressed the regressive nature of the tax system?
It was mentioned in the more recent publication.
Okay. Okay. And it may be that respondents had read that PARCA quarterly. So the question was, next I want to ask you about how much different people in Alabama are paying in state and local taxes. For each group I name, let me know if you think they are paying too much, too little, or about the right amount in state and local taxes. First, would you say that you and people like you in Alabama are paying too much, too little, or about the right amount in state and local taxes? And thereafter, we asked, how about people on the lower end of the income range, people in the middle of the income range, people on the upper end of the income range? And so the pattern of responses, it indicates some sensitivity or intuition about the nature of state and local taxes in Alabama. That is, people for the most part think, or at least a majority think, that they and people like them are paying about the right amount, but we see that overall, a plurality thinks that lower income people are paying too much. So 40% of respondents think that lower income people are paying too much. A sizable majority, nearly 60%, say that middle income people are paying about the right amount, and a slight majority, about 54%, say that upper income people are paying too little in state and local taxes. So on the last item, we saw majorities really of just about every group saying that upper income people were paying too little in taxes, and even among strong Republicans, a plurality said that upper income people were paying too little in state and local taxes. That was the most popular category for them, for that group. So earlier in the survey, we had asked about the large areas of state government, and here we have a series of questions that focus in on, more detailed service areas or more specific service areas. Many of which had received news coverage in the last year. And so we asked this question: we'd like to ask you about some state services that have been in the news in the last year. For each one, tell me if you think it is adequately funded. Do you believe that this item, they were randomly ordered, is adequately funded in Alabama? And there were two groups, or two service areas, state parks and state troopers, where a majority said that those areas were not adequately funded, and pluralities thought that state courts and driver's license offices were adequately funded. For state parks, a majority of all groups said that state parks were not adequately funded, except those with the least education. as we did before, we had 2 follow-up questions that asked if people would be willing to pay more taxes in order to either avoid cuts or maintain or achieve adequate funding in these service areas. And here we see that there are lesser numbers, so these specific areas do not garner the same sort of willingness to pay additional taxes as the education and healthcare did. And so in none of the cases except state troopers did a plurality of respondents say yes. And so for state troopers, we had a plurality saying that it was the more popular category, saying that they would be willing to pay more in taxes to support this area, or to avoid cuts or maintain or achieve adequate funding. And as with public safety before, we see that a majority of women said yes to this, and a slight majority of men were saying no.
Randolph, go back one slide. Since, just to explain, all right, so those are pluralities. So the people who are not, the people who said no are not.
Yeah, only the yes responses are presented here. And so for state courts, state parks, and driver's license offices, there would be a slightly longer bar. They weren't, obviously these numbers are so big that there couldn't be a huge number left over to say no, right? But in each of those cases, the pluralities, I don't think there were majorities on any of these, but the pluralities were saying no, they wouldn't be willing to pay more in taxes for those services. There's been a lot of talk about the possibility of Medicaid expansion, and so we asked this question. Medicaid in Alabama provides health insurance to able-bodied adults and families with children only if their income is very low. Childless adults do not qualify at all. The federal government offers matching funds to states that expand coverage for low-income adults. Do you think Alabama should accept the federal funds to expand health care coverage under Medicaid or maintain its Medicaid program as is? And we asked this question last year also and had similar results, that a slight majority say that they believe Alabama should accept the federal funds to expand Medicaid. Now, this is one of those questions where we do see some polarization, and it's polarization by partisan identification. Usually for most other groups, the individuals in those groups match the overall pattern. So here we see that a majority of people self-identifying as Democrats, really a large majority, say that Alabama should accept federal Medicaid funds for expansion. A majority of people identifying as independents or having no partisan identification agree, and a slight majority of Republicans think that the current program should be maintained. There's been some discussion of closing ABC stores, and so we asked this question. In Alabama, alcohol can be bought through independent liquor stores or state-controlled ABC stores. Some say the ABC stores allow for greater control of the distribution of alcohol. Others say the state government can save money by closing the stores. Do you believe the state should continue operating ABC stores? And so about half of respondents say that Alabama should stop operating the ABC stores. And there were a couple of examples of polarization. Republicans were more likely to say stop operating, and Democrats were slightly more likely to say continue operating. But for the most part, we didn't see much polarization on this issue. Now, for 10 years, we've asked a question regarding the responsiveness of state government. And so we ask this question, we say, I'm going to read some statements. Please indicate whether you strongly agree, neither agree, nor disagree, or strongly disagree with each statement. And the first statement is, government officials in Montgomery do not especially care what people like me think. And consistently, over the last decade, we've had majorities either agreeing or strongly agreeing with the notion that government officials in Montgomery do not especially care what people like me think. And this year, and on the far right, you see it's at 67%. So we've had some lots of changes over those years, different governors, change in majority control of the state legislature, and all those things might be occasions when you would think that there would be an opportunity to see a change in the level of responsiveness. That is, the elections appear to matter in Alabama, and yet we still see what I would describe as high numbers, thinking that officials don't especially care what people like the respondents think. We asked a follow-up, or there's another statement that we ask about, and that is we ask if people agreed or disagreed with this statement. People like me have no say in what the government in Montgomery does. And here we see a similar kind of pattern, except there's been, I guess, the percent agreeing or strongly agreeing with this statement is slightly lower than the other statement, but it more clearly is been rising slowly over the last decade. So in 2007 and 2008, it was slightly less than a majority, and it's increased to about 60% in this year. And really, we see majorities of all subpopulations saying that they agree or strongly agree with this statement. People who identify as Democrats tend to agree slightly more, and older respondents tend to agree slightly more. But majorities of all groups say they agree or strongly agree. Now, there's been some discussion of whether or not it's a good idea to earmark revenue. And so this is a question we resurrected from a previous survey, and we got similar results this year. The question is, Alabama's education programs are funded mostly through income and sales tax dollars collected by the state. Highways are maintained with gasoline and automobile tax dollars. These revenues are earmarked and can't be used for anything else. Do you think it is a good idea or a bad idea to earmark tax dollars to fund a particular kind of public service? And really across the board, a majority say that earmarking is a good idea. So proponents of good government often talk about earmarking as a problem. It limits the flexibility that public officials have in terms of responding to changes in the state economy or the environment or the challenges facing the state. But I think the attraction of earmarking to state residents may reflect this, what we see in the earlier slides, that people don't feel as though the government is responsive to them and will act on the state challenges in a way that the respondents will like. There's another question shortly that we'll see that is similar to this regarding the structure of the state budget. And it's one of the questions in our partnership with the Alabama Association of School Boards. And so the first question regards whether or not the education budget should be kept separate or combined with the general fund budget. that question reads, we have a preface before asking the question. The preface is, the state of Alabama has two separate budgets. The biggest budget is for education and is funded mostly by state income and sales tax dollars. Other state programs are funded from a smaller general fund budget. Some policymakers want to combine the two budgets to give the legislature more control over state spending. And then we rotated the form of the question, alternating between this question: do you favor combining the two state budgets into one or keeping education dollars in a separate budget? And then for half of the respondents, we asked this question: do you favor keeping education dollars in a separate budget or combining the two state budgets into one? And here we see a large majority, about 69%, favor keeping those budgets separate, and there are no significant covariates, so no differences really across all groups in society, all regions of the state, all genders, races, party identifications. We ask this question: do you think there's too little, too much, or enough money now being spent on education in Alabama? And a large majority say too little is being spent on education in Alabama. So that's about 70% say that. And this has been consistent over time. And so dating back to 1993, we or others have asked this question, and we consistently get numbers around the 70% mark, maybe just under that, saying that too little is being spent on public education in Alabama. And the percentages who say enough, too much, or have no opinion on it tend also to be consistent. So this is not something new for the citizens of Alabama. They have long thought that too little is being spent on education in Alabama. Now, there's a follow-up to this. Do you think that the money that goes to education is generally being spent properly or not properly? And a majority choose not properly. So people don't think we're spending enough on education, but they have issues with the way we're spending the money we do spend on education. And in a previous year, we had a follow-up question where we asked respondents to give examples of improper spending on education. And that research indicates that there are a wide variety of reasons a respondent might choose not properly. And so some of the responses indicated that there were disagreements about priorities, whether too much was spent on athletics versus academics, or too much on technology versus emphasizing low technology instruction. There were, another common theme was that perhaps too much was spent on administration versus classroom instruction. And the responses also included a number of examples of underfunding as an example or a way in which education dollars were spent not properly. And so there are a variety of reasons why someone might say not properly, and they weren't all the examples were not examples of wasted spending. Sometimes it was, they gave examples of inadequate spending for choosing not properly. We asked respondents this question with a preface: your local government, the state, and the national government are all involved in public education. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 represents the highest level of trust and 1 represents the lowest level, indicate how much you trust each level of government to handle school funds properly. And then if necessary, we would prompt them, how much do you trust this level, or for the subsequent questions. So the general theme here is that there tends to be more trust as you get more local. And so there's the overall level of trust for the federal government was the lowest, state government was in the middle, and local government was the highest. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this. And so some groups had higher levels of trust in the national government than in state government. So African Americans, women, and Democrats tended to, in general, to be more trusting of federal government than other groups. And those self-identifying as Democrats or African Americans tended to trust the state government less than the federal government. Other respondents trusted the state government more. Now, really, all groups, regardless of either party identification or any other attributes, trusted the local governments more than the state government. So it's really, we only see this split in the level of trust that respondents had in the national government. We asked, how well do you think Alabama public schools do compared to schools in other states? On average, would you say that public schools in our state perform worse than schools in most states, perform as well as schools in the average state, or do we have one of the better performing systems in the nation? And so a plurality say that Alabama schools perform worse than most, with about 48% choosing that response. And those who had higher levels of education were more likely to say that Alabama schools were performing worse. We asked a similar question about the level of school funding. How well funded do you think Alabama public schools are compared to schools in other states? On average, would you say that public schools in our state are funded at lower levels than schools in most states, funded as well as schools in the average state, or do we have one of the better funded school systems in the nation? And so a majority says that that our states are funded lower than most other states, and really majorities of every group held this view. Although as the level of education increased, people are more likely to say that our schools were funded at a lower level than other states. We really drilled down into different areas within the education category where budget dollars might be dedicated. And we asked this question. I'm going to list some ways we spend education dollars. For each one, please tell me whether you think the state of Alabama should spend more, less, or leave funding at the current level. And the order of these items was randomized when presented to the respondents, and they're sorted here in terms of the percentage saying that the state should spend more in that area. And so we see that really for every area except textbooks, 80% or more say that spending should either be kept at the current level or more should be spent. And then for many of these items, clear majorities advocate increasing funding. And so if you look at teacher salaries, technology infrastructure, classroom supplies, hiring more teachers, school security, classroom technology, and music and the arts, we have clear majorities saying that spending should be increased in those areas. We have something like a majority, or roughly half of respondents, saying that teacher professional development, pre-K education, and textbooks deserve more spending, and then lesser amounts for school counselors and for transportation. Sometimes you'll hear people say that it doesn't matter how much you spend on education. We asked respondents what they thought. Do you think a level of school funding makes a difference in the quality of education? And the overwhelming majority say yes, it does make a difference in the quality of education. Over 80% say yes to this, and it's majorities of every group, of every political stripe, of every region of the state. And so it really, across the board, people believe that funding makes a difference in educational quality. We asked if a community is too poor to fund local schools adequately, should the state government make up the difference? And a huge majority here also say yes, that the state should make up the difference. 86% of respondents, and again, majorities of every possible way that you could slice up the population says yes. Now, we've had some, I guess, changes in the last decade in the way that we fund education. So we asked a question about the current funding system, and we described the system and then ask what people think about it. So the state of Alabama makes sure that the combination of state and local funds going to schools reaches the minimum level that the state defines as adequate. Many communities collect additional taxes for schools, and as a result, there are differences in the level of funding. The lowest funded school system in 2015 was about $1,500 per student below the state average, which amounts to about $30,000 fewer dollars for a classroom of 20 students. Some people think this gap is too big, while others think it is not a problem. How about you? Do you think the funding gap is too big, or is it not a problem? And so a large majority, almost 65%, say that the funding gap, even with the equalization program, is too big. And there were no significant differences across any region of the state, political stripe, or other demographic trait. So we've seen a lot of consistency in responses to these questions over the years. We don't necessarily, well, in terms of democratic theory, we have the expectation that government should be responsive to public preferences, but on the other hand, we don't think that in a Republican system or in a representative democracy, we don't think that we should have plebiscites on every issue. So it's kind of an interesting situation here, and so we think that there are opportunities, or I would argue that there are opportunities for policymakers either to identify and be responsive to public preferences, or to communicate and educate citizens if citizens aren't appreciating what political leaders think is the correct course of action. There's an interesting argument presented by Alan Rosenthal in his excellent book, The Decline of Representative Democracy, when he suggests, or where he suggests that one of the problems we see in state legislatures is that legislators are so concerned about not upsetting their constituents in their districts that they're unable to deliberate and to think freely about ways to solve pressing problems confronting the legislature. And I think that many of the, it was sort of a counterintuitive notion, right? That they are trying so hard to represent their districts that they're unable to, Rosenthal argues, come up with solutions that would satisfy the state at large, or the state as a whole. And I think one of the things we see in these results is that there are opportunities, or you might call it scope, for deliberation that legislators may be able to be more free in deliberation and trying to address some of the challenges that we see in state budgeting. So I think that concludes the presentation.
If anybody would like to ask questions at this point, that'd be fine.
Do you have a breakdown in percentages of Democrats and Republicans who were surveyed?
Yeah, so we see that there are about a third of the state identify as Republicans, about a quarter identify as Democrats, and about 42% either identify as independents or have no partisan identification.
And that's consistent with the people surveyed?
Yes.
And what was the income breakdown for the group surveyed?
Oh, I'm not sure I know what you're asking.
You know, their social status, I guess. Were a lot of them wealthy or low income, or did you ask their income?
We did. I have not compared the income levels to the census reports on that. And so we really just make sure that let me put it this way, we have a lot of faith and evidence to support the notion that if you use random sampling and in a consistent way and then weight to match sex and gender, that the results will be representative of the state population. So we really just fine-tune with the weighting, because the random sampling is so good at matching the attributes of the state population that we really don't go further to evaluate those other kinds of variables. So it's unlikely that those would be out of line with the population traits. And we also see that the results are so consistent across years that it's unlikely that any one year has a sampling problem. Okay.
When you ask about higher income people with taxes and things like that, do you give any kind of what higher income is, or do you just say higher income?
Oh yeah. So no, we leave it to the respondents to have their idea of what lower income, middle income, or higher income people are.
If you think back to that slide, it looks like most people identify themselves as in the middle, which is not surprising necessarily.
I figured that would maybe could vary different if you're poor versus if you actually are higher income. Like, you know what I mean? What do you think that is?
There were some differences, although not many by income level. I guess the main difference I recall was that higher income people were more likely than others to think that lower middle income people were paying too little. But for the most part, the general pattern was upheld. And so majorities of all income levels thought that upper income people were paying too little, and a plurality of upper income people thought upper income people were paying too little.
So obviously, I mean, the state legislators are not paying attention to this. So why do you do these polls, and what do you hope comes from these results?
Well, I don't.
It's figures to know, but like, what do you hope comes of it?
I don't know that I would characterize it that way. I mean, we do see gaps between the kinds of proposals that come before the legislature and the things that might be popular with the public. Mm-hmm. And a couple of those are highlighted this year, right? And so we're talking about revenue proposals, and most of the ideas that I think have been proposed appear to be unpopular, and the one idea that's popular has not been proposed. But over time, I believe we have seen